Have you ever felt an inexplicable sense of awe while walking down a narrow, cobblestone street, or noticed how certain paths seem to pull you forward almost against your will? That's no accident. Ancient cities were masterfully designed to manipulate your emotions and direct your footsteps long before modern psychology even existed. Picture yourself in the heart of Rome, where winding alleys weren't just chaotic twists of stone but deliberate mazes meant to disorient and humble you. Or step into the grand boulevards of Imperial China, where every straight, imposing avenue was a calculated display of power, designed to make you feel small in the face of the emperor's might. These streets weren't just routes from place to place. They were psychological instruments crafted by rulers and architects who understood the subtle art of controlling crowds, shaping beliefs, and even stirring devotion, all through the layout of the ground beneath your feet. What if I told you that the very streets of Pompeii were engineered to funnel crowds toward temples, making worship feel like an inevitable part of daily life? Or that Athens' pathways were arranged to create sudden, dramatic reveals of sacred sites, triggering bursts of reverence at just the right moments? These ancient designers didn't have algorithms or big data, just an intuitive grasp of human nature. They knew that curves could calm, straight lines could intimidate, and narrow passages could create intimacy or tension. And here's the thing, their tricks still work today. Ever wondered why certain modern cities feel so alive while others leave you cold? The answer might lie in secrets buried for centuries, hidden in the blueprints of the past. This isn't just about history, it's about the invisible forces that shape how we move, how we feel, and even how we think. Over the next few minutes, we'll unravel the genius behind these ancient designs, from the hypnotic spirals of medieval marketplaces to the strategic bottlenecks of fortress towns. You'll never look at a city map the same way again, because once you see the patterns, you'll start noticing them everywhere, in the way a street corners you toward a monument, or how a sudden open square lifts your mood without you even realizing why. The past isn't just preserved in stone, it's alive in the very paths we walk today. So let's take a journey through time and discover how the streets beneath our feet have been quietly guiding us for thousands of years. Ancient architects didn't just build cities, they designed experiences. Take the towering processional avenues of ancient Persia, where the sheer scale of the road was meant to overwhelm anyone walking toward the royal palace. The wider the street, the more insignificant you felt, a psychological trick that reinforced the king's dominance before you even reached the throne. Or consider the cramped, winding alleys of medieval European towns, where every sharp turn served a dual purpose, confusing enemy soldiers during an attack, while also creating intimate spaces that fostered community among residents. These weren't accidents of urban planning, they were calculated tools of control, crafted by rulers who knew that the shape of a street could shape the minds of the people walking it. In Rome, the sacred way wasn't just a path to the temples, it was a carefully choreographed journey. Pilgrims moved through a sequence of narrow passages that suddenly opened into grand plazas, each transition designed to amplify the emotional impact of the sacred sites. The contrast between tight, shadowy lanes and sunlit courtyards triggered a visceral reaction, a mix of relief and reverence that made the religious experience feel even more profound. Meanwhile, in the markets of Baghdad, bustling bazaar corridors were intentionally narrow, forcing shoppers to slow down, linger near stalls, and crucially spend more. The ancient world was full of these subtle manipulations, turning everyday movement into a form of silent persuasion. But perhaps the most fascinating examples come from sacred cities like Varanasi in India, where the labyrinthine lanes leading to the Ganges River aren't just practical pathways, they're a spiritual funnel. Pilgrims follow a deliberate, winding route that builds anticipation, making the first glimpse of the holy river feel like a revelation. This wasn't just about getting people from point A to point B. It was about crafting an emotional arc, using the very ground beneath their feet to guide not just their bodies but their hearts and minds. And the eerie part, these techniques still work. Modern shopping malls, theme parks, and even government buildings borrow from the same playbook, proving that ancient urban psychology is alive and well, just dressed in contemporary concrete. The deeper you look, the more you realize how little has changed. Today's city planners might use traffic studies and zoning laws, but the core idea remains. The way we move through space shapes how we think, feel, and behave. Whether it's the intimidating symmetry of a dictator's parade route or the gentle curves of a Zen garden path, every design choice whispers something to our subconscious. So next time you find yourself drawn toward a monument without knowing why, or feeling unexpectedly calm in a tucked-away courtyard, remember you might not be walking through the city. The city might be walking you. In Athens, the Panathenaic Way wasn't just a route, it was a carefully scripted performance where every step was designed to stir something deep in the soul. Imagine walking this path during the Great Panathenaic Festival, surrounded by towering statues of gods and heroes, their marble eyes seeming to follow your progress. The road itself was a slow, deliberate climb, winding just enough to hide the Acropolis until the perfect moment. Then, as you rounded the final curve, the Parthenon would erupt into view, its columns gleaming in the sunlight, a sudden, breathtaking reveal meant to knock the breath from your chest. This wasn't an accident, it was emotional engineering. The incline played a crucial role too. Unlike a steep staircase that might exhaust you, the gentle slope forced a slower, more deliberate pace. With each step, the city's grandeur unfolded around you, temples to your left, monuments to your right, every detail whispering that you were part of something far bigger than yourself. Even the statues were placed with precision, Athena's likeness positioned just so, her outstretched arm guiding your gaze upward toward the sacred rock. It was a masterclass in using space to manipulate time and attention, stretching the journey into a meditation. And then there were the crowds. On festival days, thousands moved in unison along this path, their collective energy amplifying the sense of occasion. The narrowest points funneled everyone closer together, creating a shared intimacy, while the wider sections allowed for dramatic pauses where choirs might sing or priests might perform rituals. This ebb and flow of movement, tight then open, crowded then expansive, mirrored the rhythms of worship itself, turning a simple walk into a sacred act. What's remarkable is how these ancient techniques still echo in modern spaces. Think of the way a museum's layout builds anticipation before revealing its star exhibit, or how a sports stadium's entrance ramps hype up fans before they see the field. The Panathenaic Way proves that the best designs don't just guide our feet, they choreograph our emotions. And perhaps that's the most enduring lesson of all. Whether carved in stone or poured in concrete, the paths we walk are never just about getting somewhere. They're about feeling something along the way. Rome's winding streets weren't just charming quirks of ancient architecture, they were tools of control, meticulously crafted to bend both the path and the will of those who walked them. Take the Via Sacra, the so-called sacred way, which snaked through the heart of the city like a carefully coiled rope. Every curve served a purpose: to slow restless crowds, to stretch processions into grand spectacles, and to ensure that no citizen could rush past the empire's propaganda. Temples, statues, and triumphal arches were placed at strategic bends, forcing people to confront the might of Rome with every turn. Even the famous Roman grid, often praised for its orderly straight lines, hid deliberate deviations. A slight bend here, a gentle arc there, these subtle twists funneled foot traffic toward markets, theaters, or imperial monuments, weaving commerce and loyalty into the rhythm of daily life. But the genius of these curves went beyond crowd control. They also manipulated perception. A straight path lets you see your destination from afar, giving you time to think, to hesitate, even to rebel. A winding road, though, it keeps you guessing. Each turn becomes a psychological checkpoint, a moment where your attention is redirected, whether toward a towering statue of the emperor or a bustling marketplace stocked with goods from conquered lands. The unpredictability of the route made the city feel larger, more mysterious, and far more powerful than any single citizen. And when imperial processions rolled through those same streets, the curves amplified the drama. Chariots and soldiers couldn't barrel straight ahead. They had to slow down, pivot, and reappear in dazzling bursts of pageantry, turning every corner into a staged revelation. Even the shadows played their part. Narrow, curving streets created alternating patches of light and darkness, a natural spotlight effect that highlighted certain buildings or statues while obscuring others. Walk down one of these lanes at midday, and you'd find yourself stepping in and out of the sun, your focus shifting with the light guided, without realizing it, toward whatever the architects wanted you to see. It was urban design as psychological theater, where the streets themselves were the directors and every citizen an unwitting actor. And here's the twist, we still fall for these tricks today. Modern cities might not have emperors, but they have advertisers, politicians, and urban planners who use the same principles. Ever notice how a shopping district's maze of alleys keeps you browsing longer? Or how a scenic highway curves just enough to frame a breathtaking view? The Romans mastered this art 2,000 years ago, proving that the best way to lead people isn't with a straight line, it's with a path that feels like their own idea. The Forbidden City didn't just dominate Beijing's skyline, it rewired the minds of everyone who entered. Every inch of its design was a psychological trap, from the crushing weight of its walls to the way its pathways forced visitors into submission. Take the Meridian Gate, the colossal entrance where ambassadors and officials once waited for hours under the scorching sun or biting cold. That wasn't poor planning, it was a calculated humiliation, a reminder that no one approached the emperor without sacrifice. And once you passed through, the real manipulation began. The central axis of the Forbidden City stretches nearly 2,000 feet, but you'd never see the throne room from the start. Instead, gates and courtyards unfolded in a relentless sequence, each one taller and more imposing than the last. This wasn't just a path, it was a gauntlet of awe. With every step, the buildings grew grander, the colors more vivid, golden roofs glowing against vermilion walls, while the spaces between them narrowed, squeezing you forward like a rat in a maze. By the time you reached the Hall of Supreme Harmony, the sheer scale of it all made resistance feel impossible. Your knees would buckle before you even saw the emperor. But the real genius lay in the illusions. Those long, straight avenues, they weren't actually straight. The architects built in subtle curves, invisible to the naked eye, but enough to warp your sense of distance. What looked like a short walk became an exhausting march, stretching time itself to make the palace feel endless, and the flooring, layers of brick laid in alternating patterns, created a subconscious vibration underfoot, a physical unease that kept visitors off balance. Even the sound was manipulated echoes swallowed by the vast courtyards, so whispers died unheard, while the emperor's voice boomed across the stone like thunder. And then there were the numbers. 9 was sacred, representing imperial perfection, so every detail hammered it home. 9 rows of door nails, 9 mythical creatures perched on rooftops, even 9,999.5 rooms, because only heaven itself could have 10,000. This numerical hypnosis seeped into your bones, reinforcing with every glance that you stood in a realm beyond mortal rules. The chilling truth, it worked. Generals who'd faced down armies would tremble in those courtyards. Scholars who debated emperors for centuries fell silent under that weight, because the Forbidden City wasn't just a place, it was a machine for manufacturing obedience, proving that the right combination of stone, space, and shadow could break even the strongest wills. And if you think we're immune today, walk through any government building or corporate headquarters. You'll feel the same invisible hands pushing you, not with walls, but with psychology. The emperors may be gone, but their blueprints live on. Medieval towns didn't just happen to have cramped, tangled streets. They were engineered that way, with every dead end serving as a trap and every narrow alley acting as a choke point. Imagine being an invader storming a walled city, only to find yourself lost in a maze of shadowy passages that abruptly stop at blank walls. Archers would rain arrows from hidden vantage points above, while townsfolk dropped boiling oil or stones from overhanging buildings. The very streets became weapons, turning unfamiliarity into a death sentence for attackers. But the real masterstroke, these same designs kept the locals in line long after the battle cries faded. Take the fortified city of Carcassonne in France, where the inner streets twist like a coiled snake. Walk 10 paces and you'll hit a wall, turn a corner and you're face to face with the cathedral's looming facade. There was no wandering aimlessly here. Every path herded you toward centers of power. Market days forced crowds through these bottlenecks, where tax collectors and priests could observe every transaction, every whisper. And after sundown, the absence of light transformed those alleys into tunnels of dread. The flicker of a lone torch would stretch shadows into monstrous shapes, making even a short walk home feel like a journey through a nightmare. Fear wasn't just a side effect, it was the blueprint, yet the psychological grip went deeper. Notice how many medieval town squares sit at the intersection of multiple dead-end streets. That was no accident. It meant anyone gathering for a revolt would have no quick escape routes. Authorities could seal off the exits with a handful of guards. And those iconic overhanging upper stories, they didn't just maximize space, they leaned inward to create a literal weight pressing down on you, a constant subconscious reminder of being watched, controlled, hemmed in. Even the sounds played tricks. Cobblestones echoed footsteps ominously, so you could never be sure who or how many were approaching. What's chilling is how these tactics mirror modern crowd control. Ever notice how stadiums or protest zones funnel people into narrow corridors with limited exits? Or how certain neighborhoods use lighting and alley layouts to discourage loitering? The medieval mind understood something we're only now quantifying with psychology studies. The shape of a space doesn't just direct movement, it dictates emotion. Those ancient streets weren't just built to defend against swords, they were built to defend against thought itself. Pompeii's streets weren't just pathways, they were a masterclass in silent persuasion, where every stone and corner whispered instructions to the people walking them. Take those iconic raised sidewalks, for instance. At first glance, they seem purely practical, keeping feet dry during rainstorms and floods. But look closer, and you'll see how they funneled movement like invisible rails. The stepping stones weren't randomly placed. They formed deliberate gaps, forcing pedestrians to slow down, zigzag, and crucially, pause near shopfronts. Merchants paid top coin for spots along these natural choke points, knowing that a moment's hesitation could turn into a sale. Even the grooves worn into the stones by cartwheels served a dual purpose. They kept traffic orderly while subtly herding walkers toward certain alleys and away from others. Then there's the so-called irregular grid, which was anything but haphazard. While modern eyes might see chaos, Pompeii's layout was a carefully coded map of power. Wealthier districts enjoyed wider, straighter streets, their uniformity signaling control and privilege. Meanwhile, narrower, winding lanes crisscrossed working-class areas, creating a maze that felt as confining as it was deliberate. Crossroads weren't just intersections, they were social filters. A sudden jog in the road might mark an invisible boundary between neighborhoods, discouraging unspoken mixing. And those infamous one-way streets, they weren't about traffic flow, they were about controlling who could go where and when. But the real stroke of genius was in the advertisements. Election slogans and shop signs weren't plastered randomly. They clustered near fountains, benches, and other natural stopping points, turning idle moments into opportunities for persuasion. Even the graffiti followed patterns, with political messages dominating certain walls while romantic declarations crowded others, as if the city itself had zoning laws for emotions. What's haunting is how familiar it all feels. Today's shopping malls use nearly identical tricks, winding layouts to keep you browsing, benches placed near high-end stores, even scent machines pumping out vanilla near checkout lines. Pompeii proves that the art of guiding people isn't modern, it's ancient. The stones may be silent, but their lessons scream across the centuries. The best control doesn't feel like control at all. It feels like your own 2 feet choosing the path. The avenue of sphinxes in Egypt didn't just connect temples, it transformed every footstep into an act of devotion. Picture walking this path during the Opet festival, flanked by hundreds of stone guardians with lions' bodies and human heads, their unblinking gaze fixing you in place. The route was deliberately straight, stretching nearly 2 miles with no curves to distract you, no corners to offer respite. This wasn't just a road, it was a conveyor belt of reverence, designed to make you feel the weight of each step as you advanced toward Karnak's sacred precincts. The ground itself sloped upward so gradually you'd barely notice, your body leaning forward as if pulled by invisible strings, a physical echo of submission to the gods. Babylon's Ishtar Gate took this idea even further, turning a simple entrance into a psychological gauntlet. The processional way leading to it wasn't just paved with bricks, it was lined with walls covered in glazed tiles depicting lions, dragons, and bulls, mythical beasts that seemed to pace alongside you as you walked. The colors were calculated to overwhelm, deep blues like the night sky, accented with gold so bright they hurt your eyes in the midday sun, and the gate itself. It wasn't a single arch but a series of them, each one slightly smaller than the last, creating a telescoping effect that made the final doorway seem to recede no matter how close you got. The message was clear. Approaching the divine was an infinite journey, always just out of reach, but the real mastery lay in the timing. These routes were designed to be walked at specific speeds, often painfully slow, dictated by the rhythm of rituals. In Babylon, priests marked intervals with symbols and chants, ensuring the crowd moved like a single organism. In Egypt, the spacing between sphinxes created natural pauses where offerings were made, turning geography into liturgy. Even the textures underfoot played a role. Rough stones near the start smoothed to polished slabs near the end, so your very footsteps sounded different as you crossed from the profane to the sacred. What's astonishing is how these ancient techniques mirror modern, experienced design. Think of the forced perspective in Disneyland's main street, making the castle appear larger as you approach, or the way airports use lighting and signage to herd travelers toward duty-free shops. The ancients knew something we're only now rediscovering. Movement isn't just physical, it's emotional. Control the path, and you control the story unfolding in the walker's mind. Whether paved with gold or pixels, the principle remains the same. The best journeys aren't about reaching a destination. They're about becoming someone new along the way. The width of a street was never just a measurement, it was a message carved in stone. In ancient cities, space was power, and who got to walk where spoke volumes about who mattered. Take Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital, where the grand avenues stretched wide enough for ceremonial processions of thousands, their sheer breadth designed to awe. These weren't just thoroughfares, they were stages where the empire flaunted its dominance, parading priests, warriors, and captured enemies through corridors of spectacle. But step off those main arteries and the story changed. The side streets narrowed abruptly, twisting like veins in a clenched fist, forcing commoners into single file while the privileged glided through open squares. This wasn't unique to the Aztecs. In Versailles, the palace's geometric gardens and sprawling boulevards weren't just beautiful, they were a social filter. Only the nobility had the right to stroll the widest paths, their leisurely paces a performance of status, while servants darted through hidden service alleys, their movements as cramped as their roles. Even the cobblestones whispered hierarchy. Smoother, flatter stones lined elite routes, while uneven rubble tripped up the lower classes. But the most brutal symbolism lay in colonial cities, where street width became a weapon. Spanish conquerors in the Americas built their grid-planned towns with a cruel precision. Broad central plazas for cathedrals and government halls, surrounded by deliberately narrow indigenous quarters. The contrast wasn't just visual, it was psychological. Wide streets meant light, air, and visibility. Narrow ones meant shadows, stifling heat, and surveillance. In Lima, the Spanish even enforced laws dictating how far indigenous roofs could overhang into their streets, using architecture to etch racial divides into the ground itself. Yet there's a twist. Sometimes the squeezed streets fought back. In medieval Islamic cities, the labyrinth of tight alleys wasn't just about crowding, it was about climate. Narrow passages created cooling shade and funneled desert breezes, turning the geometry of oppression into an ingenious survival tool. And in Venice, the cramped calli weren't just for the poor, they were a defensive maze, forcing invaders into knots while locals slipped away unseen. What's haunting is how these ancient patterns persist. Today's gated communities with their sweeping driveways or financial districts with sky-high sidewalks follow the same unspoken rules. The width of a street still tells you who belongs and who doesn't. The stones beneath our feet have always been more than just pavement. They're a mirror, reflecting who a society values and who it's willing to overlook. Venice's canals shimmer like liquid gold under the afternoon sun today, but centuries ago, those same waters ran dark with strategy. Every twist and turn of the city's waterways was a calculated move in a high-stakes game of control. With over 100 islands and only a handful of bridges, Venice's rulers didn't just embrace the water, they weaponized it. Land routes were deliberately scarce, forcing merchants, messengers, and even criminals onto boats where they could be tracked, taxed, or intercepted with ease. Gondolas might look romantic now, but back then, they were the equivalent of surveillance drones, each oar stroke echoing under the watchful eyes of patrolling guards. The genius of this system lay in its invisibility. Unlike walls or gates which announce their presence with brute force, water flows silently, masking its power. Take the Grand Canal, that sweeping S-curve through the heart of the city. Its width wasn't just for show. It created natural bottlenecks where customs officers could inspect cargo, while its depth ensured only certain vessels could pass, keeping out rival ships or rebellious locals trying to flee. Even the smaller canals were designed with purpose. Some dead ended abruptly, trapping wrongdoers with nowhere to paddle, while others looped back on themselves like liquid labyrinths, disorienting anyone who didn't know the secret routes. But Venice didn't invent this tactic. Over 2,000 years earlier, the rulers of Babylon were using canals to divide and conquer. Their waterways weren't just for irrigation, they acted as moats, slicing the countryside into isolated parcels. Farmers needed permission to cross, turning every harvest into a transaction overseen by the state. And when rebellions flared up, officials could flood entire districts with a single diverted channel, drowning dissent in its tracks. The chilling part, these strategies didn't stay buried in history. Modern cities still use water to manipulate movement, just with less romance. Think of the artificial lakes around government buildings, or the fountains in corporate plazas that aren't just decorative but subtly discourage protests by eliminating gathering spaces. Even amusement parks leverage this ancient wisdom. Ever notice how water rides always funnel you past gift shops and snack stands? The lesson is clear. Whether it's a Venetian canal or a suburban retention pond, water never just flows. It obeys. The stones of ancient cities didn't just shape what you saw, they orchestrated what you heard. Step into the agora of Athens, where the colonnades lining the streets weren't just for shade, they were acoustic amplifiers. A politician's voice bouncing off those marble columns could carry farther than a shout, turning every speech into a surround sound performance. Even the placement of statues played a role, strategically positioned to break up wind currents that might steal words midair. This wasn't just architecture, it was sound engineering centuries before the invention of the microphone. But sound could also be suppressed. The backstreets of Rome twisted like tangled vines for a reason. Their irregular walls absorbed whispers, making it nearly impossible for secrets to travel far. Meanwhile, main thoroughfares were paved with resonant stones that clicked under sandals, creating a rhythmic pulse that drowned out hushed conversations. Authorities didn't need spies in every alley when the streets themselves acted as eavesdroppers, amplifying what mattered and swallowing what didn't. Theaters took this further. Pathways leading to the orchestra in Greek amphitheaters weren't just access routes, they were sonic funnels. The slight upward slope and curved walls channeled voices toward the stage, so even a murmuring actor could be heard in the highest seats. And in Ephesus, the marble-paved Curate Street was designed with a slight concave curve, reflecting the babble of merchants and priests upward into the hillside homes of the elite, a constant auditory reminder of who was meant to listen and who was meant to be heard. Even water joined the chorus. Fountains in Roman forums weren't just decorative, their splashing masked private conversations, while the sudden silence of a turned-off aqueduct could signal an imperial announcement was coming. The ancients understood something we often forget. Noise isn't just background, it's a language. A city's soundscape could calm a crowd with the lull of distant hymns or tense it with the clatter of marching boots. Today's noise-canceling headphones and speaker systems might seem light years ahead, but the goal remains the same. Modern stadiums use the same acoustic tricks to amplify cheers, while shopping malls pipe in music to mask uncomfortable silences. The difference: ancient architects didn't need electricity to turn sound into a tool. They just needed stone, space, and a deep understanding of how noise shapes the mind. Walk down any old city street, and if you listen closely, you can still hear their genius echoing off the walls. Ever notice how some cities trick you into thinking you're exploring freely, when in reality, every turn was planned centuries ago? Machu Picchu's stone pathways are a perfect example. What looks like a network of choices is actually a carefully crafted funnel. Travelers climbing those misty peaks would encounter deliberate forks in the road, each branching path artfully designed to guide them toward sacred sites or lookout points. The illusion of choice made the journey feel personal, almost adventurous, yet every decision led to the same awe-inspiring conclusion: a terraced temple or a panoramic view of the Andes. This wasn't just clever engineering, it was psychological theater where the thrill of discovery masked the invisible hand of the architects. Fez's Medina took this idea to another level. Its 9,000 alleys twist and turn like a hall of mirrors, with dead ends disguised as shortcuts and identical-looking junctions meant to disorient. Outsiders would swear they were forging their own path until they stumbled upon the same tanneries or mosques again and again. Locals, though, knew the secret. Certain arches were slightly narrower, some corners bore hidden markers, and the random bends followed an unspoken logic. The maze wasn't just to confuse invaders. It ensured that visitors eventually wound up exactly where the city's rulers wanted them, in bustling markets where every detour led back to commerce. Even the Romans mastered this art. Walk through Ostia Antiqua's ruins, and you'll spot streets that seem to branch freely, until you realize they spiral inward like a nautilus shell, subtly steering you toward the Forum. The genius: these curves were gentle enough to feel natural, yet precise enough to make descent nearly impossible. Protesters couldn't gather spontaneously when every road funneled them into monitored plazas. Meanwhile, pilgrims following the Via Sacra believed they were choosing their route, unaware that the alternate paths all converged at the same altars. What's fascinating is how modern spaces borrow these tricks. Ever wandered a casino floor where winding aisles hide exits and slot machines seem to appear at every turn? Or noticed how airport terminals loop you past duty-free shops no matter which gate you're headed to? The blueprint isn't new, it's ancient. Those forked roads and false paths prove one thing: the most effective control doesn't feel like control at all. It feels like your own curiosity leading the way. Light and shadow weren't just elements of ancient streets, they were tools as deliberate as any sculptor's chisel. Walk through Jerusalem's old city at midday, and you'll feel it instantly. One moment you're bathed in blinding sunlight, the next swallowed by cavernous shade. These sudden shifts weren't accidents of cramped medieval planning. They were emotional amplifiers designed to heighten the tension between sacred and mundane. Pilgrims shuffling toward the Church of the Holy Sepulchre would move from scorching courtyards into cool, shadowed passages, their bodies registering the change before their minds. Could a physical metaphor for the journey from worldly heat to divine refuge? Even the stones played their part, their warm golden hue glowing in the sun while fading to near black in the alleys, making every turn feel like stepping between two worlds. But the true masters of solar theater were the Egyptians. At Karnak Temple, the axis was aligned so precisely that on the winter solstice, the rising sun would pierce the entire length of the hypostyle hall, illuminating statues of the pharaoh and gods in a calculated sequence. The effect was pure stagecraft. First, the ruler's face would catch the light, then his outstretched arms, and finally the offerings in his hands, a slow reveal that transformed astronomy into political propaganda. Meanwhile, in the temple of Abu Simbel, sunlight penetrated the inner sanctum just twice a year, striking the statues of Ramses Roman II and the gods Amun and Ra-Horakhti, while leaving Ptah, the god of darkness, forever in shadow. This wasn't just symbolism, it was sensory manipulation, using light to carve hierarchy into the very air. Even the Romans weaponized shadows. In Pompeii, the porticos along the forum's edges were spaced to cast stripes of shade at precise intervals, creating a natural seating chart for public gatherings. The elite lounged in perpetual coolness near the columns, while petitioners sweated in the open square, a visual lesson in who belonged where. And in Hadrian's villa, courtyards were angled so that afternoon light would frame the emperor's chosen advisors in a golden halo, while rivals found themselves perpetually backlit, their features blurred into insignificance. What's astonishing is how these techniques still shape our cities today. Ever notice how certain monuments seem to catch the light just as you approach? Or how religious sites often use stained glass to dapple visitors in colored sunlight? The ancients knew something we're only now quantifying. Light doesn't just help us see, it tells us how to feel. From the flickering torchlight of medieval processions to the neon glow of modern Times Square, the play of light and shadow remains one of the most potent tools for guiding emotions, and nobody wielded it better than those who built their streets without a single watt of electricity. Climbing the stairs of Mont Saint-Michel wasn't just a physical challenge, it was a social sieve. Each uneven step, each treacherous turn of the spiral staircase carved into the rock served as a silent gatekeeper. The frail, the elderly, the unprepared, they'd falter early, left gasping on the lower levels while the determined pressed upward. This wasn't an accident of medieval construction. It was a deliberate filter, ensuring only the most committed or the most privileged reached the sacred heights. The higher you climbed, the thinner the crowd became, until only the clergy and nobility stood at the summit, gazing down like gods upon the stragglers below. The staircase didn't just lead to the abbey, it embodied the very hierarchy it protected. Mesoamerican pyramids took this idea even further. The steps of El Castillo at Chichen Itza weren't just steep, they were perilously narrow, forcing climbers to ascend sideways, clinging to the edge. At first glance, this seems impractical until you realize the terrifying descent was the point. Priests and rulers would descend these same steps during ceremonies, moving with practiced ease while commoners struggled, their fear and clumsiness reinforcing the divide between the divine and the mortal. And at Teotihuacan, the Pyramid of the Sun's staggered platforms created optical illusions, making the summit appear even more distant than it was, a psychological trick to magnify the achievement of those who reached it. But the most brutal examples come from places like Sigiriya in Sri Lanka, where the final ascent to the Lion's Mouth gateway involved clinging to a sheer rock face on narrow, exposed stairs. The faint of heart turned back, only the worthy proceeded. Even the act of climbing became a form of worship, each labored breath and trembling limb a sacrifice to the gods, or the kings who claimed to speak for them. What's chilling is how these ancient tactics persist. Ever notice how luxury boutiques place their most exclusive items on high shelves, forcing customers to crane their necks or ask for assistance? Or how government buildings often feature imposing staircases leading to the offices of power? The message is the same: elevation isn't just about height. It's about who gets to rise and who's designed to stay below. Constantinople's Mies Street wasn't just a road, it was a golden leash pulling wealth toward the emperor's coffers. Stretching from the imperial palace to the city's heart, this grand avenue functioned like an ancient version of a modern shopping mall's anchor tenant strategy. Luxury silk vendors, gem traders, and perfumers clustered near the forums, where guards ensured only those with heavy purses could linger comfortably. But step onto a side street, and the scene shifted abruptly. The air grew thick with the smell of salted fish and raw leather, the stalls cramped under makeshift awnings. This wasn't urban sprawl, it was economic engineering. Every inch of pavement had a tax bracket, and the city's planners knew precisely how to exploit it. The real cunning lay in the bottlenecks. Where the Mies intersected major plazas, the street narrowed just enough to create natural traffic jams, forcing wealthy shoppers to pause near the highest-end shops. Meanwhile, side alleys angled sharply away, diverting carts carrying bulk goods like grain or pottery toward less glamorous markets. Even the cobblestones played a role, smoother near the luxury forums to accommodate silk-slippered feet, rougher near the fish docks where traction mattered more than comfort. This invisible grading system ensured that a merchant's location broadcast their status as clearly as a neon sign. But Constantinople didn't invent this game. Centuries earlier, the Silk Road's oasis towns used nearly identical tricks. Caravanserais, those fortress-like inns for traders, were always built just inside city gates with a single winding path leading to them. Travelers exhausted from desert crossings would follow this route like sleepwalkers, passing through a gauntlet of tax collectors and toll booths before they could rest. And in Rome's Trajan's Market, the multi-level design wasn't just about space, it was about price stratification. Ground floor stalls sold spices and jewels, while upper levels hawked cheap pottery and used clothing. The higher you climbed, the poorer the goods and the customers. What's startling is how little has changed. Today's high-end shopping districts still cluster near landmarks, while discount outlets get pushed to the urban fringe. Even online, premium products appear first in search results, mirroring the Mises prime real estate. The ancients proved one enduring truth: control the streets, and you don't just guide feet, you shape fortunes. Those arrow-straight Roman roads slicing across Europe weren't just feats of engineering, they were psychological weapons disguised as infrastructure. Picture a legionary marching down the Via Appia, his boots pounding rhythmically on stone slabs so precisely fitted that not even a knife blade could slip between them. That flawless surface wasn't just about speed, it was about domination. Every perfect mile hammered home the same message: Rome's order could conquer even the wilderness. Barbarian tribes might hide in forests or marshes, but these roads laid the land bare, exposing every hill and valley to the empire's relentless gaze. The genius lay in the details. Those iconic milestones lining the roads, they didn't just mark distance, they branded the landscape. Each one bore the name of the emperor who commissioned it, transforming a simple journey into a forced history lesson. Travelers couldn't stop for water or rest without being reminded of who owned the ground beneath their feet. Even the road's unyielding straightness served as propaganda. Local footpaths might meander around sacred groves or ancestral burial sites, but Roman engineers plowed through them without deviation, literally paving over indigenous traditions with imperial indifference. But the real mastery was in the choke points. Bridges like the Milvian Bridge near Rome weren't just crossings, they were control stations where tolls could be exacted and troublemakers identified. And those deceptively gentle inclines leading up to garrison towns, they slowed carts just enough for inspections, while giving soldiers the high ground to monitor traffic. The roads even manipulated time itself. Rest stops were placed at exact intervals, matching a legion's daily march, turning military logistics into civilian routine. What's chilling is how these tactics persist. Modern highways still follow Roman straightness for patrol efficiency, and toll plazas occupy the same strategic positions. The empire may have fallen, but its blueprint for control remains etched into our asphalt, proof that the most enduring conquests aren't won with swords, but with stone and clever geometry. The streets of ancient Islamic cities didn't just connect buildings, they traced the very patterns of the cosmos. Walk through the radial layout of Baghdad's original round city, and you'd find yourself pulled toward the great mosque at its center like a planet orbiting the sun. This wasn't mere urban planning, it was sacred geometry made tangible, where every avenue served as a line in a vast spiritual diagram. The mosque's towering minaret didn't just call the faithful to prayer, it anchored the entire city to the divine, with streets radiating outward like rays of celestial light. Even the angles held meaning. intersections often met at precise degrees corresponding to Islamic mathematical principles, turning the metropolis into a living expression of God's perfect order. Privacy and community existed in delicate balance within these designs. While main thoroughfares buzzed with commerce and conversation, the residential quarters wove a different pattern, dead-end alleys branching like capillaries from the arterial roads. These cul-de-sacs, known as sikkers, weren't accidents of poor planning. They were intentional sanctuaries, shielding family life from prying eyes while still connecting to the communal pulse of the city. A single ornate doorway at the alley's end might lead to a shared courtyard where children played under the watch of neighbors, blending seclusion with belonging. The very stones underfoot reinforced this duality. Smooth, polished tiles marked public spaces, while rough-hewn cobbles signaled the transition into private realms. Water wove through these cities as both practical resource and spiritual metaphor. The Qanat systems bringing cool underground streams to surface channels did more than irrigate. They mirrored the Islamic concept of baraka, or divine blessing flowing through all things. Fountains in courtyard homes weren't just decorative. Their symmetrical placement reflected the 4 rivers of paradise described in the Quran. Even the hexagonal patterns of drainage grates held significance, their 6 sides echoing the 6 days of creation. Every element, from the grandest boulevard to the humblest waterspout, whispered the same truth: nothing in the city was truly secular. Marketplaces took this sacred geometry to another level. The souks of cities like Cairo or Damascus weren't chaotic bazaars but meticulously organized circuits. Goldsmiths clustered near mosques, their trade considered closest to spiritual purity, while tanners worked downstream along water channels, their messier craft tactfully positioned. The winding paths between stalls followed precise ratios, ensuring shade in summer and sunlight in winter, a physical manifestation of balance, or mizan, one of Islam's foundational principles. Merchants arranging their wares in intricate radial displays weren't just showing off. They were unconsciously replicating the patterns of celestial orbits described by medieval astronomers like al-Biruni. What's astonishing is how these designs nurtured both piety and practicality. The same geometric principles that glorified God also cooled homes through clever airflow, and the careful zoning that honored different trades also minimized fire risks. This wasn't architecture imposed from above, it was wisdom woven into the streets themselves, a reminder that divine order and daily life were never meant to be separate. Today's urban planners still study these layouts, not just for their beauty, but for their profound understanding of how space shapes souls. The next time you see a star-patterned tile or a courtyard's perfect symmetry, look closer. You might be staring at a 1,000-year-old blueprint for harmonizing heaven and earth. Baroque architects didn't just build cities, they staged divine dramas in stone, where every boulevard was a script and every staircase a soliloquy. Take Versailles, where the 3 radiating avenues fanning out from Louis Roman XIV bedroom weren't merely decorative. They were literal lines of power, drawn across the landscape like spokes on a wheel with the Sun King at its hub. Stand at any point along those avenues, and your gaze would be funneled inexorably back to that single window where the king performed his morning levee, a ritual where nobles competed for the honor of handing him his shirt. The message was unmistakable. Even the geometry of the streets declared that all glory, all attention, all existence orbited around one man, but the true stroke of genius lay in the forced perspective. Those seemingly endless alleys of trimmed hedges, they were meticulously tapered, narrowing just enough to make the palace appear perpetually close yet impossibly grand, a visual trick that left visitors feeling both drawn forward and dwarfed. Fountains erupted on cue as the king walked past, their jets timed to his movements, water itself bending to his will. Even the gravel was specially selected to crunch at a particular volume underfoot, so courtiers couldn't sneak up unannounced. This wasn't urban design, it was psychological theater where the set pieces manipulated the audience into reverence. Rome's Spanish steps perfected a different kind of crowd control. Their sweeping, butterfly wing curves weren't just beautiful, they were a social sorting machine. Pilgrims and peasants clustered on the lower steps, their upward gaze mirroring their spiritual aspirations, while the elite lounged on the terraces above, literally looking down on the spectacle. When the Pope gave blessings from the Trinità dei Monti church at the top, the staircase became a sacred conveyor belt, lifting eyes and souls toward divine authority. The steps' unique shape amplified sound perfectly, so a single whispered prayer could ripple through the crowd like a wave, turning individual devotion into collective ecstasy. And then there were the hidden blades in this velvet glove. St. Peter's Square's colonnades, designed by Bernini, stretch outward like giant arms ready to embrace the faithful, but their elliptical shape creates an illusion. Stand at the focal points marked by obelisks, and the 4 rows of columns magically align into one, symbolizing the unity of the church. Step anywhere else, and the columns seem to multiply chaotically, a not-so-subtle metaphor for the disarray of those outside Catholic orthodoxy. Even the square's cobblestones radiate outward from the obelisk like sunbeams, ensuring every footstep subconsciously reinforces the Vatican's centrality. What's chilling is how these Baroque tactics echo in modern spaces. Ever noticed how shopping malls use domed atriums to draw your eyes toward flagship stores? Or how political rallies often position speakers at the end of long, crowded avenues? The tools have changed: LED lights instead of gilded statues, microphones instead of echoing colonnades, but the game remains the same. Baroque planners understood something we're only now quantifying. Beauty isn't just pleasing, it's paralyzing. Overwhelm the senses with splendor, and you'll find people kneeling before they realize they've been brought to their knees. Beneath your feet, those winding cobblestone streets hold secrets not in grand carvings or towering monuments, but in the very patterns of the stones themselves. Take Lisbon's iconic wave-patterned sidewalks, where the black and white mosaics weren't just art, they were a survival manual. The swirling designs near the Tagus River didn't just mimic the water, they warned of it. Fishermen and sailors learned to read these stone tides like a nautical chart. Tighter swirls meant stronger currents, wider curves signaled calmer waters. A glance down could mean the difference between a safe haul and a capsized boat. And on foggy mornings when the river vanished into mist, the cobbles became the only map you needed. But the language of stones went far beyond warnings. In medieval Bruges, herringbone-patterned bricks weren't just laid for durability, they pointed like arrows. Follow the V shapes, and they'd lead you straight to the wool market or the guild halls, turning the entire city into a tactile GPS for illiterate traders. Miss a turn, the bricks would subtly shift to a checkerboard near dead ends, a silent course correction underfoot. Even the textures spoke. Smoother stones marked premium shopping lanes, while rougher patches steered carts toward warehouses. Citizens didn't need street signs, the pavement whispered directions through their souls. Some codes were even more covert. In Rome, certain crosswalks hid tiny fish mosaics, secret symbols for early Christians to find safe houses during persecutions. And in Ottoman-era Istanbul, alternating red and grey stones along alley walls weren't just decorative. They marked the homes of plague doctors, a warning to keep distance without sparking panic. The streets were a living ledger, recording everything from trade routes to quarantine zones in a language only the initiated could decipher. What's fascinating is how these ancient tricks resurface today. Ever noticed how some subway platforms use bumpy tiles to guide the visually impaired, or how airport floors change texture near security checkpoints? We're still speaking the same silent language, only now we call it wayfinding design. The cobblestones of the past were the original user interface, proving that sometimes the most powerful messages aren't written in ink or pixels. They're pressed into the ground, waiting to be read by anyone who knows how to look down. European colonizers didn't just conquer land, they rewrote it in straight lines and right angles, turning vibrant, winding cities into rigid grids of control. When the British marched into Delhi, they didn't just build alongside Shah Jahanabad's bustling bazaars and labyrinthine alleys. They plowed straight through them, imposing a geometric order that erased centuries of organic growth. The new avenues, like the brutalist Kingsway, weren't meant to blend in. They were deliberate gashes in the urban fabric, wide enough for cannon carriages and regimented marches, their unyielding symmetry a visual proclamation. This land now answered to a foreign ruler. But the real violence of these grids wasn't in their construction, it was in their symbolism. In Spanish colonies like Mexico City, the Zocalo's perfect square didn't just replace the Aztec ceremonial center. It physically overwrote it, with the cathedral's shadow literally falling across the ruins of the Templo Mayor. Every straight street radiating from that plaza was a spoke in a wheel of domination, ensuring that no matter which direction you walked, you moved under the gaze of church and crown. Even the street names betrayed their purpose. Avenida de la Conquista, Cal del Gobernador, labels that turned geography into a ledger of subjugation. Philadelphia's grid, often praised as a model of democratic planning, hides a darker pedigree. William Penn's orderly squares weren't just about fairness, they were about legibility. Straight streets made it easier to track who owned what, who owed taxes, and crucially, who might be slipping away from oversight. The same logic drove French colonizers in Algiers, where they demolished the Casbah's dense neighborhoods to carve wide boulevards that gave cannons clear lines of fire. These weren't improvements, they were territorial seizures by other means, turning the chaos of local life into something a foreign bureaucrat could comprehend and control. Yet resistance simmered in the cracks of these imposed grids. In Mumbai, colonial engineers found their straight lines mysteriously warping around Hindu temples and market squares that refused to disappear. In Lima, indigenous builders subtly tilted doorways or shifted foundations so that, despite the Spanish grid, certain alleys still aligned with solstice sunrises sacred to Inca traditions. The streets became battlegrounds of memory, where every defiant curve whispered that some maps can't be redrawn. What's chilling is how these colonial grids still shape our world today. From the numbered streets of Manhattan to the geometric precision of Cape Town's District 6, their legacy lingers not just in pavement, but in power. The next time you walk a city's straight, orderly blocks, ask yourself, who drew these lines and what or who was erased to make them? The smooth, polished stones of Zanzibar's slave market streets gleam deceptively under the sun, a cruel irony considering the agony they once witnessed. These weren't just pathways, they were stages for humiliation, meticulously designed to maximize visibility and minimize resistance. Captives were forced to march single file down narrow alleys that funneled them toward auction blocks, their every stumble and despairing glance visible to buyers perched on raised platforms. The curves of the streets weren't for beauty, they were psychological screws tightening the sense of disorientation and helplessness, and at the end of this grim procession, a dead-end courtyard where the enslaved would circle like livestock before being examined, the architecture itself reinforcing their status as commodities. Half a world away, Nazi architects weaponized width. Berlin's east-west axis wasn't just widened for efficiency, it was stretched into a throat of intimidation, its vast expanse swallowing individual voices beneath the thunder of boots and tanks. The sheer scale of these boulevards turned crowds into faceless masses, their bodies dwarfed by the regime's monumental buildings lining the route. Even the materials were chosen for sonic impact. Granite paving stones amplified the rhythmic stomp of parading soldiers, while the absence of benches or shade ensured no one could linger without permission. These streets weren't meant for living, they were built for performing loyalty under threat. But oppression often wears subtler disguises. In colonial Cape Town, the long street corridor wasn't lined with walls by accident. Its high, windowless facades forced laborers and servants to move invisibly between wealthy homes, their presence erased from the sightlines of privilege. Meanwhile, in the American South, plantation driveways curved deliberately past slave quarters, ensuring visitors would witness the order of the system before reaching the main house. Every brick, every turn served as a reminder of who controlled the landscape and the lives upon it. The chilling truth, these designs still haunt us. Modern surveillance cameras perched above public squares or highways bulldozed through minority neighborhoods follow the same playbook. The tools have changed, but the calculus remains. Control the streets, and you control the stories told within them. When we walk these paths today, we're not just tracing history, we're stepping on blueprints of power that some still use to redraw the boundaries of freedom. Las Vegas casinos didn't invent the art of disorientation, they just polished it with neon. Those winding, windowless floors where slot machines glitter like treasure at every turn. They're straight out of the labyrinthine playbook of ancient Crete. The designers know exactly what they're doing. No clocks, no straight lines, no clear exits. You're not lost, you're strategically diverted, just like pilgrims in a medieval cathedral, where every chapel and relic forced a pause, a prayer, and a donation. Even the carpets are part of the ruse, their dizzying patterns masking spills and stains while subtly nudging your gaze toward the next game. It's all theater, and the script was written centuries ago. Washington, D.C.'s diagonal avenues tell a different story, one of power, not profit. Pierre L'Enfant's 1791 plan didn't just borrow from Rome's radial streets, it weaponized them. Those broad boulevards radiating from the capital aren't just pretty sightlines, they're dominance in concrete. Like the sacred way of ancient Babylon, they force your eyes and footsteps toward the seat of authority, while the sharp angles create natural choke points for protest. And just as Roman triumphs paraded spoils of war down the Via Sacra, modern inaugurations march down Pennsylvania Avenue, proving some imperial stagecraft never goes out of style. But the real masterstroke is hiding in plain sight, your smartphone. Modern, smart cities have swapped cobblestones for sensors, tracking foot traffic with the same precision as Roman surveyors once measured their roads. Barcelona's superblocks aren't just pedestrian zones, they're data farms, where your movement fuels algorithms that predict and profit from your next turn. It's the ancient Qanat system reborn as code, funneling human flow toward commercial oases. Even the Gruen transfer, that shopping mall trick where confusing layouts make you forget why you came in, is just Pompeii's stepping stones in air-conditioned form. What's eerie is how little the endgame has shifted. Whether it's a pharaoh's procession or a Times Square billboard, the goal remains: control the path, and you control the people walking it. The tools have upgraded from shadow and stone to pixels and Wi-Fi, but the blueprint, that's been set in stone for millennia. Walk through any modern city, and you're not just moving through space, you're dancing to a rhythm older than the streets themselves. Venice didn't just ignore the rulebook, it drowned it. While empires from Rome to Paris obsessed over straight lines and geometric order, Venice's streets twisted like seaweed in a tidal current, defying every convention of urban control. Invaders who breached its lagoon defenses quickly found themselves adrift in a liquid labyrinth, where canals doubled as dead ends and footbridges could be yanked up like drawbridges at a moment's notice. Even Napoleon, who conquered the city in 1797, threw up his hands at its illogical layout. What he failed to grasp was the genius in that chaos. A city that couldn't be mapped couldn't be tamed. The very alleys that frustrated foreign armies also fostered intimacy, corner bakeries where neighbors traded gossip over morning bread, hidden courtyards where artists experimented beyond prying eyes. Venice's Defiance wasn't just practical, it was poetic, proving that a city built on water had no use for landlocked thinking. Tokyo's survival is etched in its asphalt scars. When firebombs rained down in 1945, the city's organic street patterns, born from centuries of villages merging along meandering footpaths, should have been a liability. Yet those same tangled alleys became lifelines. Narrow lanes slowed the flames' advance, while irregular blocks created unexpected shelter pockets. Post-war rebuilders pushed for Western-style grids, but Tokyo resisted, clinging to its fractal roots. Today, its neon-drenched side streets pulse with a vitality rigid plans could never replicate. Tiny izakaya bars nestle beneath skyscrapers, their paper lanterns glowing like fireflies in an urban forest. The lesson: chaos isn't the absence of design, it's design that prioritizes adaptation over authority. Even older rebellions hide in plain sight. Fez's medieval Medina, with its 9,000 alleys, wasn't just built to confuse invaders, it was a living protest against centralized power. Craftsmen arranged their tanneries and looms in deliberate disarray, ensuring no tax collector could ever fully account for their goods. In Aleppo, Souk corridors twisted like knotted thread, protecting merchants from both Mongol raids and Ottoman overreach. These cities weaponized their own complexity, turning confusion into armor. What's radical is how this anti-grid philosophy thrives today. Barcelona's superblocks deliberately break up automotive grids with pedestrian havens, while Copenhagen's bicycle highways weave through the city like capillary veins, proof that the most humane cities often follow nature's messy blueprints rather than a ruler's straight edge. The next time you get delightfully lost down some winding alley, remember, you're not disoriented, you're experiencing urban design's oldest act of rebellion. Those winding streets of Venice and the grand avenues of Versailles weren't just feats of engineering, they were experiments in human psychology, raising a question that's even more pressing today. When does urban design stop guiding and start controlling? Take those raised stepping stones in Pompeii, subtly herding shoppers toward certain stalls. Charming in the 1st century, perhaps, but imagine if every sidewalk in your city tilted imperceptibly toward corporate sponsors, or if traffic lights were programmed to nudge you past high-end stores. The line between thoughtful planning and soft coercion blurs fast when architecture becomes behavioral science. History shows us the double edge of this power. The Forbidden City's mind-bending corridors were built to inspire awe, but also submission. Medieval mazes like Carcassonne's kept invaders out, but also kept dissenters in. Even the wide, open boulevards of Haussmann's Paris, praised for sunlight and air, were secretly designed to make barricades impossible and cannon fire more effective. The same streets that protect can also surveil, the same curves that enchant can also ensnare. Now fast forward to today's smart cities. Sensors track foot traffic to optimize lighting, but could also flag loiterers. Facial recognition in subway stations might streamline commutes or target protesters. When every bench, crosswalk, and street lamp becomes a tool for data collection, who decides what counts as optimization versus manipulation. Ancient rulers had stone and shadow. Modern systems have algorithms and AI. The scale is different, but the central dilemma remains: who gets to script the story of our daily movements? Yet there's another side to this. Well-designed spaces can encourage community, safety, even joy. Copenhagen's bicycle highways reduce emissions while fostering health. Barcelona's superblocks reclaim streets for play and conversation. The difference lies in transparency and choice. A bench placed to encourage lingering is one thing. A bench that vibrates to shoo away the unhoused is another. The ethics hinge on intent. Are we designing for people or programming them? Perhaps the answer lies in the oldest streets of all. Fez's Medina thrived because its chaos belonged to everyone, a collective masterpiece of unplanned harmony. Tokyo's alleys adapted because they prioritized human instinct over central decrees. The most ethical cities might not be the ones that engineer behavior flawlessly, but those that leave room for surprise, for rebellion, for the messy humanity no algorithm can predict. After all, a street that always guides you might forget to let you wander, and sometimes getting lost is how we find ourselves. Ancient streets were never just about getting from A to B. They were psychological landscapes, shaping emotions and movements in ways we're only beginning to understand. Think about the last time you wandered through a city and felt an unexpected surge of awe, or a sudden urge to linger near a particular shop or monument. Those reactions weren't random. They were echoes of designs perfected over millennia, where every curve, width, and shadow was a deliberate lever pulling at your subconscious. From the sacred paths of Varanasi, engineered to build anticipation before revealing the Ganges, to the military grids of Roman colonies that stamped imperial order onto conquered lands, these streets were blueprints for behavior long before the term urban planning existed. What's startling is how little has changed. Today's shopping districts still use winding layouts to keep you browsing, just like Pompeii's stepping stones did. Government buildings still borrow the Forbidden City's tricks, using vast plazas and strategic bottlenecks to make visitors feel small. Even the smart cities of the future, with their sensors and algorithms, are just updating ancient principles, tracking foot traffic like Roman surveyors once measured roads, nudging choices like medieval alleys herded pilgrims toward donations. The tools have evolved, but the goal remains the same: to guide, to influence, sometimes to control. Yet there's hope in this realization. Once you see these patterns, you can't unsee them. That awareness is power. Notice how a park's winding paths invite relaxation while a corporate plaza's straight lines demand efficiency. Spot the way a neighborhood's wide sidewalks encourage conversation, while a highway underpass seems designed to keep people moving. These choices aren't neutral. They're arguments in stone and steel about how we should live. So next time you walk through a city, slow down. Look beyond the facades to the ground beneath your feet. Who designed this path? What do they want you to feel or buy or believe? The past isn't just locked in history books. It's alive in the angles of our streets, waiting to be read like a map of human nature itself. If this journey through history's hidden designs resonated with you, let's keep the conversation going. Drop a comment about the most intriguing street you've ever walked, or hit like if you'll never look at urban spaces the same way again. The stories of stone and shadow aren't finished, they're just waiting for the next curious mind to follow their